Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield for PC, Mac, Xbox, GameCube, and PlayStation 2. This review is in remembrance of Tom Clancy. He passed away earlier this week on October 1st, if you're not aware. And if you're not familiar with his works, I do highly encourage you to check out the novels The Sum of All Fears, The Hunt for Red October, of course, the original Rainbow Six novel, which would spawn the video game series. Any number of his works, really. They are thrillers of the best sort, really. The ones that have you turning the page in excitement, wanting to see what happens next. And oddly enough, I went into those books not really expecting to like them, but came out of them actually having really enjoyed the books. So I do highly encourage you to check those novels out, and he will, of course, be missed. This is a tactical first-person shooter by Red Storm Entertainment and published by Ubisoft in March of 2003 for PC. They followed this up with an Xbox port labeled Rainbow Six 3 in October, and we subsequently saw releases of the Mac port of Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield, and then the PS2 and GameCube ports of Rainbow Six 3. Yes, they are two different things. Rainbow Six 3 is the console version. Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield is the original version, the PC and Mac version. It's weird, but there are differences between the games, mostly in level design choices, as well as the UI and such like that. The same core game is still there, but I'm really not going to talk about the console versions, because I really haven't played them. I have, however, played the PC version extensively. So, the question there is, how does this fare when you compare it to the two previous games, which this is the sequel to Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, and, of course, the original game, Rainbow Six. Is it an improvement on that, or something else entirely? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it's a massive step up from the previous two games in the series. It runs on Unreal Engine 2, and what that brings with it are, of course, much improved models, where they're much less jagged, they're a lot more detailed, much smoother animations that flow together really nicely, and, oddly enough, first-person view models. Now, there is something to note about that, and the animations with them are kind of odd, and obviously the weapons themselves are slightly misshapen to some degree. They are not 100% accurate, and the animations are much the same. For instance, when you reload the weapons, instead of actually pulling the charging handle when you run out of ammo, it just shakes the weapon gently. It's kind of weird, actually, and takes a lot of getting used to. Now, certain weapons do actually have animations for the charging handle, but a lot of them just gently rock the weapon back and forth. Doesn't really make a lot of sense in those regards, but apart from that, most of the animations work out pretty well. The only problem I really have with them is that they're kind of static. And what I mean by that is, you'll notice in the video that the weapons don't really move much. And so, it just kind of doesn't really feel like they have any weight as a result. Now, when you actually use them, you can tell they have a lot of force behind them and such like that. It's just that the movement and reload animations just make them seem like they're tissue paper as far as the weight goes. That's not really a big gripe, though. And obviously, while the texture quality is not up to today's standards, and the graphics in general are not, the texture quality was much improved over the previous two games. And it actually doesn't look bad even today. It looks old, but it doesn't look bad. And for a game that's going for a more realistic art style, that's a pretty impressive feat. But what about the sound design? Well, that's more hit or miss. The weapon sound effects and such themselves actually fit the game really well. The weapons sound pretty powerful, and there are actually different sound effects depending on what fire rate you're using. For instance, if you're using burst or full auto, it's going to sound different than single shot. And so that's kind of a nice touch. But obviously it's kind of limited by the technical aspect of the engine and everything, but you can cut that some slack, considering the game was 2003. But the really big issue I have is the voice acting. Now, there are a few characters who are actual characters, and they're voiced okay, but there's not really anything really behind them. And the actual voice acting you hear when you're moving around and your team is doing the call-outs and everything, while it's very well appreciated and it's nice to have all of these call-outs, you're going to hear the same, basically 4 voices throughout the entire game. And it's regardless of what characters are talking, regardless of what their nationality is, they all sound American. So it takes some getting used to, but it's really not that big of a deal. And while these are some issues, they're not really enough to bring anything down, per se. It just takes some getting used to, and eventually you don't even really care because it's just part of the game. And you're really not focusing on the presentation of the sound in this game at all. The other thing about the sound is the music, which is pretty much your standard Rainbow Six music by this point. It was what was established in Rainbow Six 1 and Rogue Spear. And they've basically just continued that. Kind of the military-sounding stuff that fits the game really well, and except for the main theme, isn't really all that memorable, but it's still pretty decent. But what really matters are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is that you take control of the multinational task force Rainbow as they embark on a mission to stop this neo-fascist organization from executing their nefarious plots. And the plot actually goes back to 1945 in the beginning of the game and shows these 2 members of the Nazi-sponsored regime in Croatia escaping with Holocaust loot. And that's basically what they used to found this neo-fascist movement, and they're trying to effectively institute global fascism. So obviously, Rainbow would be totally against that. And your job is to take them down and to obviously thwart their plans. The thing is, even though the story gets a bit more complicated than that, it's really not the focus of the game, and it becomes very apparent. What really matters here is the gameplay, and that's pretty much what the entire series up to this point has been. Low emphasis on story, very high emphasis on gameplay. And they had to change up quite a bit in this game, because it is on Unreal Engine 2, and so they obviously had technical limitations to consider, as well as changing up movement and weapon handling characteristics and all that sort of thing. You still have all the fundaments of the original Rainbow Six. You still have a planning phase where you set up all of your gear that your characters are using. Their armor, their camouflage, included, that's all in the armor. Their weapons, attachments for those weapons, ammunition types, secondary equipment, sidearms, all sorts of different things like that. Quite a bit of customization in this game, actually, for particularly for a game from 2003. But at the same time, there's only really a few weapons that you'll really want to use. Each of them does have their own characteristics and their own stats, but there are just certain weapons that are very neutral, I guess is the best way to say it. They're good at pretty much everything that that particular class of weapon is good for. And so you're just going to stick with those for most of the game. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the other weapons are perfectly viable. You just really have to find what works best for you, and what you feel like using. I mean, in my case, there are a few that I go to when I'm wanting to do something really well, and then when I'm just wanting to have fun, I sit there and go, okay, let's go through the list and just pick out a few things that I don't really use all that much, and let's use those. Or I'll go for different themes of gear, like, for instance, go with all Russian gear, or all German gear, or whatever. And you also have quite a bit of equipment available to your team. You get, obviously, stuff like frag grenades and flashbangs and stuff like that, but you also get tear gas, heartbeat sensors, all sorts of cool gadgets here and there that really do help you out. Like the heartbeat sensor in particular is pretty handy when you're trying to be really stealthy. So you'll get all your guys kitted out, and then you'll go to the planning phase where you actually direct what movements you want your teams to do. You can get up to 3 fire teams, which are red, green, and gold. Now, as you're going through these various missions, you will have your characters doing all sorts of different things, using go codes to actually get them to do things. Like you'll say, want certain guys to hold up at a specific spot until another team gets into a good position, and maybe they do flanking maneuvers or something like that. It's definitely a tactical FPS. You do have to plan everything out, and while you do have to adapt to the situation to some degree, in the missions in particular, the campaign, you can pretty much rely on your plan to get you through. Now, it's a bit more challenging to kind of run through the whole thing yourself without any plan whatsoever, or to lone wolf things or something like that. But by and large, you're going to want to plan things out and have your guys set up good flanking maneuvers, set them up to throw flashbangs into rooms, all sorts of different things like that, using all the go codes and everything at your disposal. So then you'll go into the actual game itself, and you'll find that the actual individual combat itself feels rather different from the previous 2 games. They still have auto-aim to some degree, but in this one, you pretty much have to aim at the enemy in order for the auto-aim to kick in, and I honestly never really found auto-aim very useful in this one, unlike in the previous 2 where I felt like it was pretty much required. In this one, even though you do go down in 1 or 2 hits, you feel like you're better able to aim at targets and hit them. It feels more like a modern FPS as far as weapon handling characteristics go. You don't really feel like you need to rely on auto-aim to do everything for you like you did in the previous 2. It also helps that movement feels more natural. For instance, leaning is no longer a situation where you just kind of shift your whole body over. You now actually do lean, and you can move while leaning, and it's great. Now, the controls take some getting used to. You still have to find out where all your stance up, stance down, all your go codes and everything, all that are. But it's really a very intuitive gameplay experience. They seem to have tried to make it simple enough that it's accessible, but complex enough that it doesn't lose any of the tactical goodness that was in the previous games. And so what you end up with there is an experience with the way the game moves, with the way the controls are, whether you're using the keyboard commands or the radial menus or anything like that. All this just fits together really nicely. That's not to say the game isn't without its problems. It has several problems, mostly in the AI. And when you actually go into this game, you will find very quickly, if you're running it on the lowest difficulty setting, the enemies are pretty stupid. They can still hit you, but they're pretty stupid. And you go to the step higher than that, they're not quite as stupid, but they're still kind of stupid. They're just way better shots and have way better reaction times.
Mission completed.
And while it is still a problem that your guys will kind of get in your way, or they'll get caught on things and not be able to catch up to you, or other things like that, you'll still run into a few glitches here and there. Nothing really serious, though. All this really doesn't bring the game down all that much. In fact, the AI problems in the game end up being kind of comical, because they manage to still make the game challenging. Particularly if you put it on the hardest difficulty, you're going to have a pretty hard time with it, actually. Because you still go down really easily. Enemies go down really easily, too. But you still go down really easily. The enemies still have really fast reaction times and are really good shots. And you really do have to rely on your squad mates to actually have your back. And that's something that is really good about Raven Shield compared to the previous 2 games. Your squad mates will actually react good enough.
Tango down.
Usually, anyway. Sometimes they get tripped up, but usually they're good enough, and that's enough. And particularly when you're sitting there playing it, say you're playing it for the first time and you haven't figured out that using single shots and bursts is way more effective than full auto. And so you're like, oh, look, an enemy. I've played Call of Duty. I could certainly hit them. No, you can't. So after a few shots, you're suddenly aiming at the sky as far as the recoil goes. This is a very slow-paced FPS. It's not quite as slow-paced as some others out there, but it's still a pretty slow-paced game. And you really do have to think and plan things out, even when you get to the multiplayer. Now, unfortunately, Ubisoft kind of shut down the multiplayer servers. You can still get it to work with stuff like Hamachi and such like that, but when this thing actually allowed you to play online via Ubi.com, it was fantastic. When you would get all these people working together, and instead of having AI squad mates, you had actual people being your squad mates,
Reform on me.
the community was just fantastic. And you would get into this thing, and you would find that people are friendly. They would help you out with things you were confused with, or you weren't really sure what terminology was going on, that sort of thing. And you would work together to complete all the objectives. Whether it be a co-op game, or even an adversarial game. And that's something I never really got with the later games in the Rainbow Six series. This one really did have fantastic multiplayer. It was just so fun. Particularly the co-op, but even the adversarial play was fun. It was a very different style of play than what we're used to with the run-and-gun style FPSs, and really the adversarial play isn't the strongest suit of the game, but it was still fun. But that co-op, you get your whole squad set up, you work out the plan before you actually get into the level. You're all sitting there, you stack up at the door, your guy in front tells you that he's about to open the door, and then you all just bust into action, clear the level, no casualties. Immensely satisfying feeling. And it's really just kind of hard to describe just how fun that multiplayer actually was. I didn't expect it to be as fun as it was, but it was. And that's actually the thing I miss most about this game, because you can't really do it anymore. I mean, unless you've got some friends and you're playing it over LAN, or you're playing it over something like Hamachi, like I said, you can't really play the multiplayer like you used to. So, it's a shame. But
Reform on me.
there are options available for those who are dedicated. So, all of this blends together. And while the game does have problems, as any game does, they're not enough to really bring the game down. And what you end up getting with this thing is pretty much the epitome of what a great tactical first-person shooter is. It's certainly the best one I've played so far. And admittedly, there aren't all that many tactical FPSs out there, but Raven Shield so far has been the best of them. It's not for everyone. It's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. But it is an absolute blast to play. And for a tactical shooter fan, it's a must-own. I give it a 4.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.